Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. All right. This afternoon, I have, whenever you happen to be watching this, I have Kyle from Ben Holladay Bourbon joining me today. And I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name
Eh,
because I'm going to get it wrong. But
Yep.
if you could just kind of give me a quick rundown of who you are, Kyle, and we'll hop into this.
Yeah. So I'm Kyle Merkline. I'm the master distiller here at the Holladay Distillery. So been with the company kind of basically since the beginning. Kind of joined that first year when looking for someone to run it full time. So I've been here. The first 6 years of my my time here was spent actually making bourbon and in the lab and hanging out. And then the last couple have been trying to get our name out there and sell the bourbon and talk about it and tell our story. So it's been a fun couple years now, but that's kind of who I am, my role with the company.
Perfect. Yeah. So, and if I do all of my due diligence, which I usually do, you started off making biofuel, and you've made your way into this particular thing. Did you ever imagine that this is where you would end up, or was it always, you had an interest in science and
Yeah.
agriculture, and you're just going to run the biofuel reign, ethanol or whatever you
Yep.
happen to do?
Yeah. So 100%, it was more of, I was always a science-based, plus agriculture. So
Mhm.
I grew up in Northwest Kansas on a farm. And with that, my dad, he went through several droughts, and it was just kind of a period where he's like, don't do this. Don't come take over the family farm. It told me to do anything else. Told me and my brother and my sister the same advice. Like, just go do something besides this. And so uh, that's where kind of wanted to stay in that field. So went and got a bachelor's and master's in biological and agricultural engineering. And so that kind of staying in that realm. But ultimately, my first job after the bachelor's degree was making biodiesel from soybeans. Not as fun as this industry. So I went back and got that master's. My master's research was fermentation, kind of focused in on that. And so it's really throughout that education, it was, how can you take this grain? How can you add value to it one way or another? That was always something Dad kept saying. He's like, he had grain sorghum. Hey, why don't you figure out something that you can use that for? That would help me out a lot. But ultimately, just that value added processing of the grain, still staying in that realm, but not necessarily being on the farm, actually. So yeah, that was kind of the interest. And obviously I love math and science. That's what drove me to the engineering side of things as well.
Yeah, and I work in an industry where I come across people that are very, very much like you on a regular basis. You had all of the danger of working at a whiskey plant with none of the benefits doing biofuel, right? You're making the
Yeah.
highly combustible
Yeah.
outcome, but you really, really shouldn't consume it after it was
You
all
know,
said and done. So you said you've been with Holladay pretty much since the beginning. So tell me about how Holladay came into existence.
Yeah, so we are the oldest distillery west of the Mississippi, still on its original location. So we were founded in 1856 by Ben Holladay and his brother David, who came up from Kentucky. And so, they created this distillery on site. Ben went on. There's a whole history page on our website. Definitely encourage everyone to check it out. But Ben went on to be a pretty large figure in American history and the Stagecoach King, largest private employer in the United States, and a very interesting and cool story with that. But we started making that bourbon in 1856, and we continued to do so on site, really up until about 1985. In that 1985 timeframe, people didn't want to drink as much bourbon, and so the company that owned us at the time kind of chose to uh, ultimately close down and not reinvest in this facility. And so we shut down that operation. We still stayed on location, focusing in on the other brands, and we have a bottling facility and partner facilities that we've worked with during that time. But we weren't making bourbon. And so then I guess fast forward to, the mid 2010 timeframe. And we, as a company, the group, new management, new ownership, overall kind of wanted to go back to the roots, and, bourbon was becoming hot again. And so we wanted to really focus in on our history and that, the real story with what we were doing. And so that was kind of the thought and the focus. 2015 ultimately got our distillery back up operational and distilled the first batch, and then full-fledged again in 2016. So that was when I joined, was in 2016, to run it as a full-time then once it was rolling. And that was, the beginning. We started with our original mash bill, which is 73% corn, 15% rye, 12% malted barley. That's the one that we can trace throughout our history, right? That was everything about starting back up was meant to kind of pay respect and go with our history and our heritage that we had on site. And so that's what we started with that whole first year. That's kind of what we made. And then in 2017, laid down our first batch of our wheated bourbon. And that wasn't, something of our history, but that was something that we wanted to do, and a big part of who we are now. But so yeah, we were laying down bourbon, and during that time, it was still trying to figure it out as we went of what was the final product going to be. You start this, and it's a massive investment, and I'm not the person writing the checks. I'm not the one who is ultimately in charge of that. And so as you go, it's, hey, where's the bourbon at? What's it taste like? And so I'd get samples, present them to board and shareholder meetings, but then ultimately, you kind of just, you wait, you see whether you can continue to invest in that. And that was kind of what we did. Thankfully, we're able to wait 6 years. So that was when our first release came out in May of 2022. That Ben Holladay Bourbon was 6 years old, bottled in bond, all done from our facility. And so, it was very, I think, a big statement to be able to wait that long. Our history, everything, I keep mentioning that, but everything really was rooted in that past and the history. And so we had people on site who kind of knew that and knew the age of what was the sweet spot. 6 to 10 years on site was the sweet spot here with our rick houses that we have. And so it was a big driver to be able to make it that long. And so, yeah, that was a big, I think ultimately a very positive thing for us. You only get one shot at kind of that first impression. And so that was, able to do that. And then the 6-year bottled and bond soft red wheat bourbon that came out March of last year. And so then we've been rolling ever since. So had various offerings, but that's kind of the quick rundown of our history with that.
So there's about 4 or 5 different ways I can go next. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because that's, my brain's a little ADD like that. And so sometimes I think it's ADHD now. So you guys use 73% corn, being where you are. Where does your grain come from?
Yeah, so all the corn, that one's easy to get locally. So that's all within, kind of one farm, 15 miles of our distillery supplies that. And then on the back side of that, the same farm, they take the stillage and feed to the cattle. But the other grains, the malted barley, we don't malt in-house. So obviously we purchase that and get the best available for us. And then same with the wheat, we can get that kind of in this region, soft red winter wheat. And so that one we don't have a specific farmer on that necessarily, but it's coming from kind of that northern Missouri, southern Iowa, Nebraska area, depending on each time. But yeah, so that one is as local as we can. And then the rye, that one actually, that one we just continue on with the best available. And so we're going with the European rye on that one.
Yeah, and you said you guys, kind of hit 6 years was the minimum that you wanted to be at. Do you have a maximum? Do you have like a range that you're shooting for here,
Yeah.
or do you know yet?
I don't know for sure if we know. Everything can always change, right? But I'd say ultimately for us, 10 years is kind of our target end period, because we as a group, we don't really like over oaked products. And so it's one of those things, we don't want to just plan on a, 15-year and not knowing if it's going to taste good. It's one of those things we'll see as we go along, how the bourbon's tasting. But I think really knowing our sweet spot historically, we've had 10-year product here that tasted phenomenal, and so we know that that is for sure something we want to do. But beyond that, never say never. But that once you start getting into those older than 10 years, you risk kind of that
Mhm.
tannic and an over oaked, and it's just not what we're necessarily looking for. So that's kind of the range. But again, never know.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe you're aware that you probably are aware of this. It's a pretty unique position to be in to be able to wait 6 years to put out the first offering, to kind of get to a more mature product, because a lot of folks are either going younger than that, or they're selling, unaged spirit, or making something
Hmm.
else. Having the ability to kind of hold it back,
Yeah.
has resulted in a pretty significant impact, I think, on the final product, I guess. So, as a part of your distillation process, 6 years ago, you started
Hmm.
laying down new make, which
Yep.
is hitting your 6 year bottled and bond that you kind of pushed out initially. Um, and for most people that do distilling, your white dog just gets better as you get, better at making it. So, can we imagine that the 2017 and the 2018 white dog is getting better? So then subsequently, the final output is going to grow stronger. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's the hope. I hope so, because then that continues to keep me employed. So that's always what we're looking for. But yeah, I think
Mhm.
ultimately we did. You start out and if you think about the position of starting a distillery and starting to age this, it's not like you know what the final product is going to taste like. You're tasting that white dog off the column, and it's like, I think this is good, but what is, like, is this actually what we
Mhm.
should be making? Is it? And every step of the process, you kind of question yourself, and you have to figure everything out. And so, yeah, I would say that ultimately we got better, more consistent overall. You work out the kinks, you have less deviations day in, day out. You know what
Mhm.
you're doing, and that ultimately provides for a much more high quality, consistent product. So yeah, that's what we're shooting for. But again, everything that first year still has turned out pretty well for 6-7 years down the line. So that's it's one of those things. You just never know. I always joke, during that time I knew I had at least the job for 6 years, but beyond that, who knew? So it's
Yeah.
it's a fun process. But yeah, I think that we'll ultimately continue to improve, and have been over the last couple years.
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, I've sort of danced around this a little bit, but going from non-existence to the first thing that you drop in the market is the 6 year product that you had. Um, did you did you imagine the reaction that hit the marketplace? At least from my perception, the reaction in the marketplace was pretty significant. People were scrambling to try to find bottles very, very quickly, and I think that's been the case since then. You can be confident in your product, but you never know what the market's going to do. Like, did you imagine that this was the level it was going to be at?
Uh, Yeah, no. Me personally, I never. I question and I question everything. I'm paranoid.
Mhm.
I think a little bit in general, but it's one of those things. We were confident in what we had, but you just never know.
Mhm.
It's tough. It's a big investment, and there's just doubts and questions and concerns. And then again, for me, I had, if you think about like fall of 2021, kind of ramping up and preparing for that release of the Ben Holladay, that original mash bill. And so uh, we brought in Doug Frost, master sommelier, master of wine, to kind of help with tasting and blending, and just really using he's local to the Kansas City area, and so using his expertise in that tasting, and he's worked at spirits competitions. And so you are paranoid, but I'm working through with him, so starting to feel good. But that first release, I had 6 months to plan on, and then the
Mhm.
next one, it's just a couple months later, and then it just keeps speeding up, and then next thing you know, our soft red wheat is coming out, and I'm still paranoid about that. And it's just every step of the process, you can't just relax and take it easy. It's been every step has been challenging as we go, but I think ultimately now we're finally to the point where glad that we're kind of steady state. And yeah, that's a long-winded answer to say no. I personally didn't expect it, because I frankly deleted all social media so that I wouldn't be, or Facebook or whatnot, so that I wouldn't see anything on it. So it's always a positive when people are talking about it the way that they have, and so definitely appreciate what's going on in the market with it.
Yeah, I understand that completely. I don't know, was it like 2 weeks ago when Facebook went down for like an hour and nobody had access? It was like, at my age, I was like, it's finally happened. We're free from this thing, right? Because we don't have to worry
Yep.
about social media anymore, and it would be fantastic. It would make this job harder.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is a thing that's on the side. And it has been very, very, very positive reception. It can be a crowded marketplace in the bourbon world today, given the number of SKUs and brand labels that exist out there, and some of the more nefarious storytelling that exists. But it sounds like you guys have a really strong control on your process and how you want things to go. And to that end, you guys, I think I've read this or seen this somewhere, that you cook your grains separate and then combine them together afterwards for a part of your distillation process, which is not necessarily the norm. What was
Yeah.
the reason for that decision?
Yeah, everything we did when kind of putting together the distillery and the cook process, it was all rooted a little bit in the past. And so when we last were making bourbon in the 80s, that's what we did. It was, we had a two cooker system. It was, you take that corn and you cook that individually, and then on the other side of it, you take that rye as that secondary. That's what they would have been using, and extract the full amount of flavor from that, and make sure that you get, obviously the cook, it's looking for sugars, but you're also looking at the amino acids that you're pulling from the individual grains, and what that causes the yeast to do in fermentation. And so, making sure that you extract the full amount of flavor during that process, that was a big driving force behind it. And that was, again, the past is what we that's what we always did. And so it was, rooted in that. Ultimately, again, as we started up, that's what drove the decision on the cook. That's what, the yeast, we didn't have that historically. Obviously, after 30 years, it disappears. But even prior to that, we lost a proprietary strain, and we didn't have access to it. So it's one of those things, you can't do that, but maybe try to come up with a yeast or find one that's as close as possible to the old strain. And so that process, then we knew we had column distillation back in the day, so we tried to renovate the old still that we had on site. But when Ben came out and looked at it, it's like, no, this was purchased used back in the day. I would
Right.
not advise. We're not going to work on it, so I would not advise trying to renovate this and fix it up. So obviously purchased a new column at that point, 18-inch column still we bought from Ben. And that was, a given for us. And then again, continuing on, 120 proof off the column, 130 proof off the doubler is what we used to do. Char 3 barrels, 118 barrel entry proof. That one obviously has probably changed throughout our history as the regulations with barrel entry proofs have changed over history. But again, that most recent, in the 80s was 118 barrel entry. And so that's what we stuck with as well. So, again, all of it from the beginning, that limestone spring water, I guess I haven't even mentioned that. That's a big, important reason. That's why ultimately the Holladay brothers located on this property. That was documented that Lewis and Clark watered their horses here. And so that spring water has been a driver in our history, as well as, we had those rick houses on site that we used to have barrels in. So that was everything from the two cooker system on was driven by kind of the past. But then I guess I'll circle back a little bit to one of your earlier questions, and we were rooted in the past of how we make this bourbon, but when ultimately you're bottling this and creating it, you can be rooted in the past, but kind of change it up to today's consumers. And so we knew that, waiting 6 years, that's not common. We also knew that, we wanted to tell the story that this is a 6-year product that we made ourselves. And so that's where the bottled and bond piece came into play, fitting into that criteria. Not everyone does. And so that was important to us. Tell that story. This was us. This was ours from the beginning. We're proud of that. We did this the hard way on site. And so that was a big driver for us. And then continuing on, with that sentiment of, hey, we made this, we know everything about it, so let's be fully transparent. And so that's where, if you look at a bottle of our product on the side, whether it's the soft red wheat or whether it's the Ben Holladay, we have full details about everything that we have. The original distillation season, as well as where the barrels came from each time we do it, and each time we bottle this, it's going to be slightly different, and we talk about that on the website. So yeah, everything was kind of uh, the decisions of how we made it and how we made the distillate were rooted kind of in that past, and then the how do we bottle it and what are we talking about, that's kind of the new take. We, again, bottled and bond piece in our history, that wasn't a big driver for us. It was not something. If you look at all the bottles of our past, you see more 80.6 or 86 or 90 proof bottles than you do the bottled and bond. So that's the slight twist that we brought, I guess, with this more recent take on it.
And you've mentioned the bottled and bond identification several times. Do you think,
Mm-hmm.
as you guys discuss bringing Holladay kind of not back from the grave, but resurrecting the
Mm-hmm.
name, creating the brand, whatever, did you guys think it was important to explore the bottled and bond just to really push? You're putting provenance on the bottle right now, very much
Yeah.
like wine vineyards do. Being able to say it loudly, proudly, and legally, right?
Yeah.
Because bottled and bond means you did it in a marketplace where there's sourcing that's happening, which is, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it can muddle up that. Is that a part of the discussion, or was it just like, hey, this is a thing we want to do?
Yeah, I think that was it was definitely along the telling the story that we made it, and that was yeah, there's nothing wrong inherently with sourcing products, but because we didn't, we wanted to know that we wanted the consumer to know that from the beginning this was ours. And so it's ultimately, I think, about transparency in the process. And I think whether you're sourcing it and you're transparent about that, that is what the consumer wants. If you make it, provide that transparency, provide as much information as you possibly can. I think that's really more of the stance that we ultimately lined out on, is how can we tell as much detail and the consumer, give them as much information as possible, because that really is what I think a lot of people want, and kind of one thing that I think sets us a little bit apart in that realm. And so yeah, definitely a big driver, that. And I was pushing for it just because I wanted to make sure it was 100 proof or higher. That's always, let the consumer water down however they choose to. I think 100 proof comes through nicely in cocktails, and so we've had that on site. But yeah, you can have a little bit more end user applications for it when you have that higher proof. So that was another thought process as well with that bottled and bond. But again, really the driver was just telling the story about us making it.
Yeah, and honestly, it's pretty much a flex on the rest of the marketplace to enter into the market with a 6-year bottled and bond product as your initial offering. Like, hey, look, here we are. This is look at it. Everybody else is showing up with 2-year, 3-year, 4-year make, and you're kind of hitting that realm. Tell me, okay, so you touched on this a little bit earlier. You're obviously generating blends, and you said you brought in a sommelier that sort of helped, like, oftentimes master distiller and master blender end up becoming the same job, and you didn't come in through a whiskey world. What was that like going in to build a blend?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's always been the kind of thing for me. The science and the still house, that's relatively easy. I mean, it's not easy, but uh, it's more straightforward. There's more known about the science of that, and so that's more in my wheelhouse. And yeah, when you go to actually, you think about that rick house and you think about the variability floor to floor, and how because we're seeing that, that first floor and the seventh floor, you see 20 to 30 degree temperature differential, you see that 15 to 20% humidity differential. So it's as you taste those, dramatically different flavor, and it's at first kind of this overwhelming feeling of how do you create what you want it to, and how do you also do that in the lab so that it's going to taste that way in the bottle at the end. And so there was a lot of learning to do. And there was, over the course of the time, I was obviously sampling through that rick house and became familiar with certain barrels, but you still have to figure out the best process. And I think we're still figuring that out. And we're still figuring out each time we bottle, we have ever slightly different floor breakdowns on the bottle, and we're seeing what works and what is the best. And each season, it's going to change. I think that's kind of the fun of really that rick house. It's why single barrels have become popular. It's you get that variability, and that as you go through, whether you're trying to create so let's just use other standard brands, for example. You might try to create the exact same flavor profile every single
Mhm.
time. That's what established brands are probably looking for. You don't want to have a QC complaint that says, hey, this doesn't taste like the last time I bought this product. And we're in that unique position where we started up. And so each time we do this, it can have a ever slightly different taste profile. It's still got the taste of place. It's still Ben Holladay Bourbon or Holladay Soft Red Wheat Bourbon. It's still tastes like it comes from our distillery. But if you do a side by side of the different bottlings, there might be a slightly different taste profile, and that's fine because we give you that information on that side chart. It's 79% fifth floor, 21% first, or it's a split between 1 through 5. It's every time it's going to be slightly different, and so you can see that on the label and directly know that.
So, and it answers the question that I was going to eventually ask of, if you're building a blend, maybe I can still ask this. When you're building the blend, do you have a reference bottle to kind of keep that core identity in place? Or is this just like there's 3 or 4 or 5, 7 notes that you're looking for specifically, and then everything else is extra?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a reference bottle, although there are in on site. I guess we have several that we kind of gravitate towards and we like the best, and so I always kind of start with that in mind. But it's really each time we do this, kind of letting the bourbon that's of age kind of speak for what's going to happen, and so it's not necessarily driving it one way or another, but kind of once you see what's available and of age. Because if you think about that bottled and bond piece, it's you have a certain season that you're working with, so you can only use those barrels from January to June or July through December. And so you have to think about that and what's available, where were those stored, how can you best use those in the overall bottling. And so that's really what we're doing each time we do this. And so it's not necessarily trying to fit a standard or always hit on a certain flavor profile, but making sure that each time we do it, we do the best possible bottling that we can.
And so, kind of, you've mentioned this a couple times on the bottle. You sort of understand the makeup, but I think on the website you also have a Distillers Journal.
Yeah.
What is the intent behind the Distillers Journal, or is there an
Uh,
intent?
that was, I mentioned earlier, I'm from Western Kansas. There's not a lot of people out there. And so I don't talk to people often. And so, our VP of marketing and sales, he's just a lovely, friendly person who wants me to suffer. He's, making me go out and talk to as many people as possible. And then I also am an engineer. I can't write. So he's like, hey, why not also have a journal for him on the website where we laugh at his grammar before we fix it. And so that's got to be the driver. But no, he's really it continues on with the transparency. It's that thing where you can give information on the bottle and that's the highlights, but there's more to the story sometimes than what you have. And so a more long form way of saying what happened, why did we pick these, what was available, what was some of the nerdier details, what was the angels share on this bottling, where did these come from, not only the floors, but there's additional detail we could put on about which ricks or how many ricks were represented or things like that. And so it's just another way of giving extra information for that whiskey geek that may not see it on the bottle or you never get to see. And so that's really our driver for that, for everything that we do. It's continuing to tell the story, continue to provide full details about everything that we're doing. And so, yeah, if you happen to pick up a bottle and you love it, you can check out the website, read all about that, pick up a few more bottles of that, and then you can, over time, if you ever find similar floor breakdowns, that you like that, and you can read about all of that information. So it's just, again, continuing on with that transparency step.
That that's exactly what I imagined, right? Because you have this group of people. There's a specific distillery here in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, that a lot of folks are really keen on specific rick houses or
Yep.
specific areas in a rick house where they're looking for things. And I could see, nerds like the
Yeah.
people who will listen to this, looking at these journal entries and understanding, okay, this bottle is going to be similar to the one that I liked that was like, 3 vintages ago, because effectively you're creating a vintage setup at this point.
Yep.
Um, and from my personal career path, right, I have to sometimes flower up my language as well, because I write very straightforward almost,
Yep.
and deal with software engineers on a daily basis. We're just very
Yep.
straightforward
Yep.
people. You can take what you want to say and throw it into Chat GPT, take it out the other side, and then cut out the words that don't seem like you, and then
Yeah.
hand that
Yeah.
over to them, and they'll be like,
Yeah.
"This
There
is
we go.
amazing."
I'm
You know,
I'm
it's-
very I feel like I'm a few bottlings behind on my releases. So maybe I just need to do that and throw it out and see what happens. I'll give it a go.
yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about the process of blending. Um, so how do you, when it's time to go ahead and build a blend, what is your process? Do you have a process that's very specific? I feel like you do, because you feel like a very process oriented guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when we first started, let me give a precursor. So when we first started this, couple years ago, so not that long ago, but it feels like a lot of things have happened since then. We've changed a few things, but or added to the lineup. But when we started this, originally it was bottled and bond. It was that 100 proof offering, and that was all we had. And so I was, always creating these blends with that thought in mind. The bottlings were 100 proof, and so I need to make sure that's where we're at. But then we added in, one barrel bourbon. So instead of single barrels, we call it one barrel. But as we go through, sampling all the barrels that are of age, we need to highlight candidates and barrels that should be candidates for this barrel pick process. And so that was another driver. And then we added in our Rickhouse proof offering, which is the high proof, full proof of each batch. And so you got to kind of think about that. So what proof is this going to be bottled at? What is the ultimate end process for it? So that's the driver. So when we first go to this, you evaluate the season. Thankfully we have a great team who's able to help pull a ton of samples from that rick house, and we get those initially from the beginning, get those candidates for the barrel pick process. That's where they come into play. And then from there, what is available, and what do we have to work with, and kind of those floors. You got to break that down. It's directly on our label. So I don't want to repeat necessarily something that's worked in the past just because it worked in the past. That's not what we're trying to do. So always kind of thinking of that in the back of my mind, but really just tasting through the floors, seeing what kind of represents that well or doesn't. And then from there, just ever so slightly adding in more barrels and creating kind of miniature components from each floor or from each rick or whatnot. And then just kind of continuing to build out ways that you can create that final bottling. And so it's just, you start with the individual barrels and highlighting those and selecting those separately, and then just slightly combining them over time and creating kind of different options to taste through. Initially it was a lot of I would create 3 different ones, and we'd taste them, throw them at the wall, and see what worked, and blind them, and there'd be a lot more people. And now it's kind of a little bit more refined, and we have an idea each time we do it what we're trying to do. And so it's as we continue to go through this, kind of getting, I guess, a little bit the process nailed down a bit, but it's still always, you never know, because each bottling, each each season has different floors, and so you really have to take each individual distillation season for what it is, and go through it uh, very methodically, I guess.
So when you set out, do you set out with like a batch size that you're targeting, 18, 20, 50, 30 barrels, or do you just set kind of a minimum and then blend to whatever profile that you want to end with?
Yeah, probably more of we have a minimum, or you say, okay, well, this one is just going to be the bottled and bond release, or this one is going to be both bottled and bond and the rick house. And so you got to know, I guess, a little bit of what's the overall size of the batch. But then from there, yeah, you kind of get that minimum, and then create the batch. And if it's a few barrels over, a few barrels under, that's probably not the end of the world. You never know either. Obviously, with the angel share, each time we do it, it's going to be a different yield.
Mhm.
We're seeing in general probably about 60% loss, or 30% loss on the 6-year product. So that's what you kind of know in general, but each one has ever so slightly deviated from that. And so, yeah, you just kind of create that target in mind, but let the whiskey speak for itself once you know that number.
And I'll kind of taking this back to something that you said way earlier. You grew up on a farm, and your dad told you to not become a farmer because of drought years, and you effectively in whiskey have found a new way to farm, right? Because you put a lot of time, you put something into the soil, so you put it into a barrel, and then
Yep.
you let it grow, and hope that it comes out the other end is either a sustainable crop, something of value, something that's useful that you don't have an empty barrel, an off barrel, a whole host of things. So you effectively scientifically found a new way to be a farmer. That's what a
Yeah,
lot of whiskey is.
that's a valid point. I'd never thought of it like that. So you're basically telling me I didn't take my dad's advice. So
You
he'll be
you
happy to
did,
hear
you just
that.
stretched out how long it goes from the time that you plant to the time that you harvest, right? Instead
Yeah,
of it being
exactly.
one growing season, you're looking at a 6-year process,
Yep. Yep.
wherein you're going to immediately lose somewhere between 20 and 40% of your crop in that time
Hmm.
frame. You're just gonna
Yep.
lose it. So neither here. It's something that it's a part of my day to day life as well.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the one barrel program. When you are tasting through barrels, kind of identifying things that might become a part of the one barrel program, do you look for the one that exemplifies the Ben Holladay brand the best, or the ones that are like the most unique and off profile for the one barrel program?
Yeah, probably. There's there's some groups that definitely want the oddball one that doesn't match it at all. I think I'm more so making sure it's still in the realm of
Hmm.
what we kind of want for the taste profile, and what we've kind of curated with that. And so I think that's still what we're doing, although I do provide a lot of variation. So, if people come in here, I try to get several different floors. If not, people will taste through 5 different samples of maybe 5 different floors, or 4 floors, or as much variety as we can give, just to, yeah, you want it to be up to our brand standard, but you want it to still be unique. And so every floor kind of has its taste profile that we're looking for, or looking at, um, or just along those lines. And so uh, still a good amount of variability when it comes to that barrel pick process. It's not like we're not allowing that, because I know, you know, coming into this, I have a pretty good idea of certain accounts, what they're going to pick depending on the end use. If it's a on-premise type place and they're going to be cocktails, I have an idea, but you don't want to just assume that. So you provide that variability, whether it's that sweeter, lower proof, low floor offering, or that high proof, high floor. There's plenty of that variation in there, but definitely nothing that's not in our brand standard, I guess.
Mhm. So, and I promise this last couple of questions on blending, because you're a
Oh,
master
you're good.
distiller. Um, you guys just, what, a week and a half ago, the release of the Bourbon Lore blend hits, right?
Hmm.
And it sells through in I don't know, minutes, however long
Hmm.
it was. It wasn't very long. I saw the PR.
Yep.
What was that like? Kind of building that blend.
Yeah. So basically, when we kind of created this 18 barrel bourbon, we have 1 barrel bourbon, that's your single barrel. And then we created an 18 barrel bourbon and a 56 barrel bourbon so that you can kind of have the kind of best of both worlds a little bit. You still get to select something and make it unique in that 18 barrel bourbon or the 56 barrel bourbon. But if you think about a lot of larger locations, they can't necessarily buy a barrel for every store. So that was what originally it was thought of, and the Bourbon Lore group came and wanted to do more than just a barrel. And so throughout that idea of the 18 barrel, and worked from the beginning. And so that was uh, ultimately what we did. And if you think about it, it's still us making a batch in this a similar way as what I'm doing. And so kind of created that experience for them. So I created 3 different options, I guess, for them to taste of, hey, this is the barrels that we have available. This is how we could combine them. And just these are the 3 thoughts. And then from there, and I forget even how many more potential small lots of groups of 3 barrels that they could try. And so it was, these are the lots or the components that make up all of these different individual samples. You can taste through those and try them and see how they kind of compare one to the other, and what you think, if they highlight certain things that you're looking for. And so then giving that option of creating their own 18 barrel bourbon based off of those individual components. So it was, they highlighted, hey, we like this one, and this one. Let's combine those and then see what happens if you add this one or that one to it. And so just kind of a little bit of an experiment as you go. But it was, again, still highlighting the certain barrels that were available to work with, kind of taking those and creating chunks that then made it a little bit easier, of, if you like this batch or this little lot component, that's 3 barrels, we're going to use all 3 of those, type of thing. And so it was something I struggled with. I needed, how do you give that rick house where there's all sorts of barrels and variability and taste profile, and how do you bring that into a setting in the lab where you can actually make that methodical and make sure that something at the end tastes like what they wanted it to and what they were wanting. And so it was just a small scale version kind of what we're doing every time, of trying to create that blend that way. So
Yeah, so it was 3 blends and then 10 micro blends, right? So
yeah,
well,
yeah, yep,
I read through an excerpt of the experience from one of the guys that was there, and it sounded like a super fun experience, right? I guess when you guys began working the blend, you were piping in some music overhead. Do you normally listen to music while you're blending, or is that a
yeah,
them?
yeah. Usually have some background music playing, and we always try to barrel pick, have music playing, and we always try to take a peek at the group and see what they're gonna want to listen to. So we always try to judge it based on that. But yeah, I always have something going on in the background. We'll usually also have several salespeople in here that I'm just trying to cover up the noise of their conversations. So gotta, have music. So
Yeah. So what do you
try and
normally
get as
pick?
loud as possible.
What is Kyle listening to when he's building a blend?
I it depends whether too many people are around or not. So it's no, I vary it up depending on kind of the day daily. So I don't have anything specific that I'm listening to. So
Okay,
I'm
so
I'm
I'll
pretty
pivot
boring
a little
taste
bit.
in music.
Yeah. Um, Tell me about your ancient cave collection.
Yeah, so the cave collection was that was a fun night when we came up with that. The first in May 22, we were doing a lot of roundtables and having people up here and releasing, kind of telling our story as we were going up to our release. And so we wanted to get a lot of people through our distillery to taste it. And so we were doing that every night, it felt like, for a month straight. And we were after one of those events, just sitting around having a glass of bourbon and talking about what's next and what kind of some of the trends in the bourbon world are, and just about ultimately double oak, toasted barrel finishing, that type of thing. And it was me and Patrick Fee, our VP of Marketing Sales, that I've talked about several times. But we were really, as you go through, like, hey, what's this process? Well, you want to have a consistent temperature. You want to have relatively cool. You don't want it to become over oaked too quickly and whatnot. And so we had kind of sitting where we were. It's like, well, do we have a spot like that? Yeah, we turned and looked at the cave, which was the starting point for tours. It had church pews in it, and it was just the generic landing point for that. And it's like, well, why couldn't we use that? So we the fun thing about working around here is you can have an idea and act on it fairly quickly. There's not a lot of red tape, and so we were able to get that bonded, converted over into bonded property. Plan on storing barrels there. Built ricks inside of it. Not massive. It's not a huge cave or anything, but got started right away. And so it was, we took the Ben Holladay Bourbon from our first floor. So a little bit cooler, 6-year, it was still 6-year-old bourbon, had aged in that cooler climate. And so not overly powerful taste profile to begin with, but took that and then dumped 20 barrels and then filled up 14 new barrels for the second time. So all various toast levels, or French oak or spiral cut wave stave, whatever independent stave had to offer. And so that was kind of the overall strategy. We just wanted to see what would work, what would happen to this over time, and how would the taste change. And so wanted to just start with that Ben Holladay mash bill. We are repeating the process with our soft red wheat. And this is just distillery only releases. We let them sit in there for about a year, and then bottled them at 100 proof. And so it's experimental in the purest sense. We don't know what's going to happen, and we just want to see what will happen. And so it's kind of one of those fun things for anyone that's visiting here or lives around here, that they can try it and provide feedback as well, and we can see what's going to work, what doesn't work. And who knows if it's going to hit the market or not, but this is our way of trying to figure that out. And so it's just been kind of a fun process to do during the last couple of years. That's in addition to kind of our core lineup. But as of now, nothing has hit the market. It's still kind of just all done here locally on site.
Yeah. So, is the Ancient Cave series sort of the extent of what you guys want to do as far as exploration or experimentation, or are there some other goals that you have to experiment a little bit?
Yeah, I think what we're doing is probably about as extreme as we're going to get. Never say never, but we are very traditional in our taste, I guess, on site. And so, it's these barrels work because it's still new charred oak barrels. It's still variations kind of in the family of the bourbon realm. They're not too extreme overall. We like to experiment with things in the still house, or experiment with kind of the minutia and the little details in the small scale. We did one where it was added some water to a barrel 4+ years ago. So took it down from 118 proof down to 105 proof in the barrel, let it age for an additional 4 years just to see what would happen. And so little things like that, we're still continuing to experiment with and having those. But, from any sort of extra finishing that's too extreme, I've seen a lot of different ones. That's not something that we've really looked too seriously at yet.
And you mentioned this way earlier, and I've been waiting for somebody to do this, right? So in the Delta, we see folks increasingly making or adding rice into their whiskey, to add in a riced bourbon or a riced whiskey or whatever. And you mentioned, your dad said, hey, if you could find something to do with grain sorghum. I'm waiting for someone to start experimenting with putting grain sorghum into whiskey, right? Because it's always a thing that interests me, because cane sorghum you could make rum out of, grain sorghum you could make beer or whiskey out of, and somebody needs to be the first to the punch with that. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to. I do know a guy. Not too much longer though. I think it's we my dad's looking at retirement, so we'll
Mhm.
have to talk to my cousin, I guess, if I need a different source. So
So we've talked all about your whiskey. We've talked about where you guys are. Tell me about visiting the distillery location, right? Because the Ancient Cave series is only on site, and
yep,
reluctantly, I was in Kansas City back in February, and did not get a chance to come by the distillery because I was there for work, and work always
yep,
consumes everything that you do, like it
yep,
often does.
yep.
But I'm aching to make my way there. So tell me about how do I visit Holiday?
Yeah. So I always encourage people to go to hollidaydistillery.com to check, for booking tours because depending on time of year and when you listen to this and whatnot, with all the hours change. No one wants to come walk around a distillery in the middle of January in the cold. So versus, summer and when it's nice. So always encourage people to check that out. But our facility, it's very much like a Kentucky style distillery.
Mhm.
We're 180 acres here. It's everything about what you would expect to see in Kentucky, and it really even driving up here. We're in Weston, just 15 minutes north of the Kansas City airport. But when you drive in, it kind of you have these rolling hills and windy roads, and it just feels like it belongs with that you are going to a distillery, and so that's very much the feel of it, and everything about it is very traditional, kind of as I mentioned. So you get to see kind of the traditional distillery done in Missouri, and so I'm biased. I think it's one of the coolest tours you can do. Definitely encourage people to make their way up here. But yeah, then on site at our welcome center, we're always trying to have fun releases, fun things that you can't get elsewhere, and so that's another driver for that as well. So
Now, do you guys also have a location in Weston proper?
yeah, so we have Holiday on Main, downtown Weston, that you can sample some products at, and that's ever evolving as well. But that has been our storefront down there for a while, and we've had a location there when we didn't have tours on site. So that is definitely there. You can check out either if you're just walking around Weston, but always encourage people to at least come up to our welcome center and check out our facility, if not from up there, just to see it, because you don't see many rick houses outside of Kentucky, Tennessee area. And so it's
Right.
just a picturesque property. Again, very biased, but definitely worth checking out. So,
Yeah, it is. It's a thing. I grew up in the very far western portion of Kentucky, but we made quite a few trips from this portion of the state all the way to Lexington, Louisville area on a regular basis. So seeing rick houses is a pretty normal thing. And then as you
hmm
travel when you get older, you're like, oh, not everybody gets it's.
yeah.
I live in the part of Kentucky where we still do, firing tobacco. So we have tobacco barns and they
Okay. Yep.
smoke in the fall and everything. That doesn't exist anywhere else,
Yep.
mostly in the world, to the point to where people come here and they're like, oh no, a barn's on fire. I should call the fire department. And they have to post things on social media. So I
Yep.
understand that mentality that it doesn't quite fit. And, it is a very stark transition. You can quickly go from the Kansas City metro area to feeling
hmm
like you're in a rural setting in a
Yep.
matter of miles. It's
Yeah.
most cities have sprawl. There's not quite that much sprawl with Kansas City,
Yep.
and rolling into the distillery is a great experience, especially for folks that haven't maybe had that experience in the past. Kyle, I'm always super thankful for the time that people are willing to give because time is the one thing you can't make more of, and so thank you for hopping on and talking about Holiday. I am always intrigued whenever a brand goes from having no product in the marketplace to this particular level of notoriety,
hmm
notoriousness. N- People are aware of what you guys are doing, and that's happened in a very, very short amount of time, and that's only
Yep.
because of the quality of what you're putting out. So kudos to you. Thank you
Yep.
for joining me and having this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Definitely enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram at Embellish Pod and give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, and contact details. Thanks for stopping by.